The operating room was chaos. 26-year-old Dr. Michael Serra stood helplessly over the patient whose life was slipping away between his trembling hands. "I can't do anything," he said with a shaky voice. At that moment, the elderly janitor standing by the door stepped forward. "Let me handle this, son," he said in a calm voice. Nobody knew he had been a field surgeon in Vietnam. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments which city in the world you're watching this video from today. And if you think stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being part of it. The night everything changed is T. Luke's Memorial Hospital had seen its share of emergencies, but nothing quite like what happened on that cold February night. Dr. Michael Serra had been working as a resident for only 8 months, and despite his medical school training, real-world trauma still made his hands shake. The confidence he'd felt during his studies seemed to evaporate whenever a life hung in the balance. The ambulance had arrived at 11:47 p.m., sirens wailing through the quiet suburban streets. Inside was a 34-year-old construction worker named David Martinez, who had fallen from scaffolding at a job site. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and possible spinal injury. The kind of case that separated experienced doctors from overwhelmed residents. In the corner of the operating room, almost invisible among the medical equipment, stood William "Bill" Thompson. 72 years old, wearing the standard grey uniform of hospital maintenance staff. For 6 years, he had mopped floors, emptied trash, and replaced light bulbs throughout the hospital. He worked the night shift, spoke only when necessary, and had never interfered with medical procedures. The medical staff knew him as reliable, quiet, and unremarkable. The kind of employee who blended into the background so completely that doctors and nurses often forgot he was there. Which was exactly how Bill preferred it. What they didn't know was that 45 years earlier, he had been Captain William Thompson, Chief Medical Officer of the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. Dr. Michael Serra looked down at the patient and felt his stomach clench. David Martinez was unconscious, his face pale and breathing shallow. Blood pressure was dropping fast, and the monitors showed signs of internal hemorrhaging that Michael had only read about in textbooks. This wasn't a simulation or a study case. This was a real person whose family was waiting in the corridor, praying for good news. "Get me a full blood panel and type and cross for 6 units, Michael ordered, his voice trying to sound more confident than he felt. But as he began his examination, the scope of the injuries became clear. Multiple rib fractures, possible punctured lung, and internal bleeding that required surgical skills beyond his current level of experience. "Doctor, his blood pressure is dropping fast," said Linda, the head trauma nurse. She had been working at St. Luke's for 15 years, and had seen enough cases to know when a patient was in real trouble. Michael's hands began to shake as he tried to stabilize the patient. The theoretical knowledge from medical school felt useless in the face of this level of trauma. Every decision felt like it could be the wrong one. Every second of hesitation could cost David Martinez his life. "We need to get him to surgery immediately," Michael said, but even as he spoke, he knew he wasn't ready for the complexity of this operation. The patient needed a trauma surgeon with years of experience, not a resident who still doubted his every move. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up. You help more people hear this story by liking this video. Every week we share unforgettable stories of silent heroes. The monitors began beeping more urgently. David's vital signs were becoming erratic, his breathing more labored. Michael tried to insert and line, but his nervous hands made the procedure difficult. The patient's blood pressure had dropped so low that finding a good vein was nearly impossible. "Doctor," Linda said quietly, "his pulse is getting weaker." Michael looked at the monitors and felt panic rising in his chest. The patient was going into shock, and the standard emergency procedures weren't working. He needed someone with more experience, someone who had handled cases like this before. "Call Dr. Richardson," Michael said, referring to the chief of trauma surgery. "Priority 1 emergency." "He's in surgery with another critical case," Linda replied. "Won't be available for at least 90 minutes. 90 minutes was 90 minutes too long. The patient had maybe 20 minutes before the internal bleeding became irreversible. Michael looked around the operating room at the other staff members, all skilled professionals, but none with more trauma experience than himself. "There has to be something we can do," Michael said, more to himself than anyone else. "There has to be a way to stabilize him until Dr. Richardson is available." But the monitors told a different story. David Martinez was dying, and Michael Serra didn't have the skills to save him. For the first time in his medical career, he felt completely helpless. "I can't do this," Michael whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I'm not experienced enough for this level of trauma. I'm going to lose him." The admission felt like a physical blow. Medical school had taught him procedures and protocols, but it hadn't prepared him for the crushing weight of responsibility when a real person's life hung in the balance. That's when Bill Thompson set down his mop, that he didn't announce himself or ask permission. He simply walked over to the operating table, his movements calm and deliberate. Michael looked up, confused and slightly annoyed. Hospital maintenance staff weren't supposed to be near patients during active procedures. "Excuse me, you need to step back," Michael began. "Let me handle this, son," Bill said quietly. His voice carried an authority that made Michael pause. There was something in his tone, in the way he moved, that suggested this wasn't just a janitor offering misguided help. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had done this before many times. "Sir, I need to ask you to move away from the patient," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. There was something about the way Bill assessed the injuries, the way he looked at the monitors, that suggested he understood exactly what was happening. Bill was already examining the patient, his hands moving with surgical precision. He glanced at the monitors, taking in the vital signs with the speed of someone reading familiar information. Then he looked at Michael, and the young doctor saw something in the janitor's eyes that made him step aside. "This patient has internal bleeding from a lacerated spleen and possible damage to the hepatic artery," Bill said without looking up. "He's got maybe 15 minutes before he goes into irreversible shock. You can either assist me, or you can watch him die while we wait for someone with the right credentials." Michael stared at him. The medical terminology, the precise diagnosis, the confidence in his voice. None of it matched the quiet janitor he had seen for months. "How do you?" "Scalpel," Bill said simply, extending his hand. Linda, confused but responding to the command in his voice, placed the instrument in his palm. Bill took it with the familiarity of someone who had held thousands of scalpels before. "Sir, I need you to explain how you know," Michael started to protest. "Son," Bill interrupted, making his first incision with perfect precision. "Right now this man is dying. We can discuss my qualifications later, or we can save his life now. What's it going to be?" The incision Bill was making was textbook perfect. Exactly where it needed to be, exactly the right depth. His technique was flawless, the movements of someone who had performed this procedure hundreds of times. "Retractor," Bill said. "And I need someone monitoring his cardiac function. He's going to crash again before we're done." Michael found himself moving to assist, his hands working automatically, while his mind tried to process what was happening. This was impossible. Janitors didn't perform emergency surgery. They didn't have medical training, didn't know anatomy, couldn't possibly understand the complexity of trauma procedures. But the evidence was right in front of him. Bill was working with a skill level that surpassed anything Michael had learned in medical school. Every movement was economical, efficient, perfect. "Who are you?" Michael asked quietly. "Someone who's done this before," Bill replied, his attention focused entirely on the patient. "Suction here. And prepare 2 units of blood. He's going to need immediate transfusion." The next hour passed in a blur of surgical precision. Bill worked with expertise that Michael had only seen in the most experienced attending physicians. He located the source of internal bleeding with techniques that looked like artistry. He repaired damaged tissue with sutures, so precise they seemed to be performed by a machine. The operating room, which had been filled with chaos and panic, became a place of focused calm. Bill directed the medical team with quiet authority, and they found themselves following his lead without question. It was as if he had transformed from a background figure into the most qualified person in the room. "Pressure stabilizing," Linda reported, wonder evident in her voice. "Good," Bill said, not looking up from his work. "Michael, I need you to monitor his respiratory function. We're going to need to watch for signs of pneumothorax. That rib fracture might have caused some lung damage." Michael nodded, still trying to understand what he was witnessing. The patient's color was returning to normal. His breathing was becoming more regular. The monitors showed vital signs that, while still critical, were no longer in the immediate danger zone. "How is this possible?" Michael asked. Bill paused for the first time since he had begun the procedure. He looked at Michael, and the young doctor saw something in his expression that suggested a much deeper story than anything he could imagine. "Sometimes, son," Bill said quietly, People aren't who they appear to be. He finished the final sutures, checked the surgical site one last time, and stepped back. The patient's vital signs were stable. The internal bleeding had stopped. What should have been a fatal injury had been repaired with skill that belonged in the country's most advanced trauma centers. Michael stared at the monitors, then at Bill, then back at the patient. This is impossible. That level of surgical skill. Where did you learn to do this? Bill was already washing his hands at the scrub sink. Does it matter? The patient's going to live. Of course it matters, Michael said, his voice rising. You just performed surgery that I've only seen done by the most experienced trauma surgeons in the country. You're a janitor. How do you know advanced surgical techniques? I'm a janitor now, Bill said quietly. That's all that matters. But Michael wasn't going to let it go. The transformation he had witnessed was too dramatic, too complete. The quiet maintenance worker who had mopped floors for 6 years had just displayed surgical skills that surpassed his own medical training. The way you diagnose the injuries, the surgical technique, the command presence, that's not something you learn from watching. That's years of training, years of experience. Who are you really? Bill dried his hands, his movements deliberate and calm. I'm someone who was in the right place at the right time. That's not an answer. Bill looked at him for a long moment, and Michael saw something flicker in the old man's eyes. Not regret exactly, but the weight of decisions made long ago. Michael, Bill said finally, some stories are better left untold. He picked up his mop and bucket, the same cleaning supplies he had been using for 6 years. In the space of an hour, he had transformed from invisible maintenance staff to master surgeon and back again. But Michael knew he would never see the old man the same way. Wait, Michael called as Bill headed toward the door. I need to understand. The patient, you saved his life. But the way you did it, the skills you showed, that's not normal. That's not something someone just knows how to do. Bill paused at the door. In my experience, Michael, normal is overrated. That's not an answer either. The old man turned back to him, and for the first time, Michael saw a hint of the person behind the janitor's uniform. The patient's going to need monitoring for the next 12 hours. His sutures are solid, but watch for signs of infection. It's unlikely, but possible. And make sure someone checks his lung function. That rib fracture could cause complications. You're giving me medical advice. I'm giving you the benefit of my experience. Michael shook his head. This is crazy. You can't just perform surgery and then go back to mopping floors like nothing happened. Watch me, Bill said simply. But before he could leave, the operating room door opened. Dr. Richardson, the chief of trauma surgery, rushed in, still wearing his surgical scrubs from another operation. I got the emergency page, he said, looking around the room. Where's the critical patient? Michael gestured to the operating table, where David Martinez was now stable and resting. He's been treated. Dr. Richardson approached the table, his trained eye immediately assessing the surgical work. His expression changed as he examined the sutures, the technique, the precision of the repair work. Who performed this surgery? He asked, his voice filled with professional admiration. Michael glanced at Bill, who had frozen by the door. We had some assistance. Dr. Richardson continued his examination, his amazement growing. This is extraordinary work. The technique, the precision. I've only seen a few surgeons capable of this level of skill. The suturing alone is textbook perfect, and the approach to the internal bleeding is exactly what I would have done, but with refinements I haven't seen outside of major trauma centers. He turned to Michael. Son, I know your abilities, and while you're promising, this is well beyond your current training. Level, who assisted you? Michael looked again at Bill, who gave him the slightest shake of his head. The young doctor found himself at a crossroads. Tell the truth and expose whatever secret Bill was protecting, or find a way to deflect the question. It was a team effort, Michael said finally. Doctor. Richardson wasn't satisfied. A team effort doesn't explain this level of surgical precision. This is the work of someone with advanced trauma training, probably military experience. The technique for repairing internal bleeding like this, I've only seen it done by surgeons who've worked in combat zones. The words hung in the air like a revelation. Michael looked at Bill, who had gone very still. Combat zones. Michael repeated. Doctor. Richardson nodded. The efficiency, the speed, the ability to work under extreme pressure. This is battlefield surgery. Whoever did this learned their skills in places where there's no backup, no second chances, no room for error. Bill had heard enough. He began moving toward the door again, but Dr. Richardson's voice stopped him. Excuse me. the chief of surgery called out. Your maintenance staff, right? Were you here when this surgery was performed? Bill turned slowly. Yes, sir. Did you see who worked on this patient? The surgeon who did this repair. Michael held his breath, waiting to see how Bill would respond. I saw Dr. Sarah save the patient's life, Bill said simply. It was technically true, but Michael knew it was far from the whole truth. Dr. Richardson seemed to accept the answer, though his expression remained puzzled. Well, whoever provided assistance, this is remarkable work. Michael, I want you to write up a complete report. This technique should be studied and possibly taught to our other residents. After Dr. Richardson left, Michael found himself alone with Bill in the operating room. The patient was stable, the crisis had passed, but the questions remained. Military experience, Michael said. Dr. Richardson said the technique was battlefield surgery. Bill began cleaning the operating room, his movements methodical and familiar. Dr. Richardson is a smart man. Are you going to tell me the truth? Bill paused in his work. The truth is that David Martinez is going to live instead of die. That's the only truth that matters. That's not enough for me. Bill looked at him with eyes that held depths Michael was only beginning to understand. Son, I've been mopping floors in this hospital for 6 years. I come to work, I do my job, I go home. That's my life now. But it wasn't always your life. No, Bill admitted. It wasn't. Michael waited, sensing that the old man was on the verge of sharing something important. I was a surgeon, Bill said finally. A long time ago. Different life, different person. Worked in places that don't exist on most maps. Places where young men and women got shot and needed someone to put them back together. Michael felt a chill. Military surgeon. Something like that. Why are you here? Why are you mopping floors when you could be saving lives in an operating room? Bill resumed his cleaning, but his movements had slowed. Because some chapters of life have to end before new ones can begin. That doesn't make sense. You have skills that could save hundreds of lives. Why waste them? Who says I'm wasting them? Bill asked. Tonight, one life was saved. That's not waste. That's purpose. Michael shook his head. You could be working as a surgeon. You could be teaching other doctors. You could be. I could be many things, Bill interrupted. But I choose to be here. Why? Bill set down his cleaning supplies and looked at Michael directly. Because sometimes, son, the best place to serve is where no one expects you to be. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is help someone else discover what they're capable of. Before Michael could respond, he realized what Bill meant. During the surgery, the old man hadn't just saved David Martinez's life. He had taught Michael things about surgery, about confidence under pressure, about trusting his instincts, that no textbook could have provided. You were training me, Michael said. Bill smiled, the first genuine smile Michael had ever seen from him. You did good work tonight, son. Better than you know. But I was falling apart. I was ready to give up. And yet, when it mattered, you stepped up. You assisted in surgery that saved a man's life. You learned things tonight that will make you a better doctor for the rest of your career. Michael felt something shift inside him. The confidence he had been searching for, the ability to trust his training under pressure. It was there now, planted by an old man who had spent 45 years carrying the weight of battlefield medicine. Will you tell me more about your story? Michael asked. Bill picked up his supplies again. My story ended when I started mopping floors. Everything else is just echoes. I don't believe that. Then believe this, Bill said. David Martinez is going to recover fully. He's going to go home to his wife and kids. He's going to see his daughter graduate from high school, walk her down the aisle at her wedding, hold his grandchildren. That's what matters. That's what tonight was about. As Bill headed toward the door, Michael realized that he might never get another chance to understand the man who had changed his life in a single evening. Thank you, he said quietly. Bill paused at the door. Thank me by being the kind of doctor who never gives up on a patient. Thank me by remembering that sometimes the most important help comes from the most unexpected places. And then he was gone, leaving Michael alone with a patient who would live, skills he didn't know he possessed, and questions that would follow him for the rest of his career. David Martinez recovered fully. He returned to work, spent more time with his family, and never knew that his life had been saved by a janitor with a secret past. Michael Serra went on to become one of the hospital's most skilled trauma surgeons, known for his calm under pressure and his willingness to take on the most challenging cases. And Bill Thompson continued to mop floors at St. Luke's Memorial Hospital, invisible once again, waiting for the next moment when an old soldier's skills might be needed to save a life and teach a young doctor that heroes come in all forms, even ones wearing janitor uniforms. Because sometimes, the most important people in our lives are the ones we never notice until the moment we desperately need them.